China's GDP growth rate, an analysis of 5% in 2024. On January 17, 2025, the National Bureau of Statistics (NBS) of China announced that the country's gross domestic product (GDP) had grown by 5% year-on-year in 2024, reaching a staggering 134.9 trillion yuan, approximately $18.41 trillion US dollars. This growth aligns with the government's target for the year, which had been set at around 5%. This report explores the factors contributing to this growth, the implications for the Chinese economy, and the underlying contradictions that some economists perceive within these figures. Annual growth overview. China's GDP growth was bolstered by a notable increase in the fourth quarter of 2024, where it expanded by 5.4%, surpassing market expectations. The quarterly growth rates for the year were as follows: Q1, 5.3%. Q2, 4.7%. Q3, 4.6%. Q4, 5.4%. The secondary industry, which includes manufacturing, contributed significantly to this growth, registering a year-on-year increase of 5.3%. Meanwhile, the tertiary sector services grew by 5%. And the primary sector, agriculture, saw a more modest increase of 3.5%. Fixed asset investment rose by 3.2%, while retail sales of consumer goods grew by 3.5%, indicating a mixed recovery in domestic demand. Stimulus measures and economic policies. To stimulate economic growth, the Chinese government implemented a series of measures starting in September 2023. These included interest rate cuts, support for the real estate market, and trade-in subsidies to encourage consumer spending. Economists have acknowledged the short-term effectiveness of these policies, but there are concerns about their sustainability and the long-term health of the economy. Kang Yi, head of the NBS, emphasized the challenges faced in achieving this growth amid external pressures and internal difficulties. He referred to the achievements as not easy, highlighting the importance of timely and effective policy interventions in stabilizing the economy. Contradictions and concerns. Despite the seemingly positive growth figures, several economists express skepticism regarding the quality and sustainability of this growth. Issues such as high unemployment rates, sluggish real estate recovery, and persistent deflation raise questions about the underlying strength of the economy. 1. Employment and income growth. The urban unemployment rate in December 2024 stood at 5.1%, slightly up from the previous month. Moreover, disposable income for urban residents grew by only 4.4%, lagging behind GDP growth, while rural residents saw a slightly better increase of 6.3%. 2. Deflationary pressures. The Consumer Price Index (CPI) rose by only 0.2% in 2024, indicating that inflation remains an issue. This follows a trend of deflation that has persisted for several quarters, raising concerns about consumer spending power and overall economic vitality. 3. Demographic challenges. China's population decreased to approximately 1.408 billion, reflecting a demographic crisis that could have long-term implications for economic growth. The working-age population is declining, while the proportion of elderly individuals continues to rise. Sectoral performance. The manufacturing sector showed resilience, with specific areas such as equipment manufacturing growing by 7.7% and high-tech manufacturing by 8.9%. Notably, new energy vehicles and integrated circuits saw production increases of 38.7% and 22.2% respectively, indicating a shift towards more advanced industries. Conversely, the real estate sector continues to struggle, with investment in this area dropping significantly. The government has acknowledged this issue, stating that the drag from real estate on economic growth is narrowing, but it remains a significant concern. Future outlook. Looking ahead, analysts predict that China's GDP growth target for 2025 will likely remain around 5%. However, the country faces several challenges, including the potential escalation of trade tensions, particularly with the U.S. and the need to stimulate domestic demand effectively. The government's focus will likely remain on proactive fiscal measures and a moderately loose monetary policy to sustain growth. In conclusion, while China's achievement of a 5% GDP growth rate in 2024 is a positive indicator in the short term, it masks deeper structural issues within the economy. The reliance on stimulus measures and the persistent challenges of deflation and demographic shifts suggest that sustaining this growth will require comprehensive and long-term strategies. Economic analysts and policymakers will need to work diligently to address these contradictions to ensure a balanced and resilient economic future for China. The assertion that China's GDP growth rate of 5% in 2024 is ridiculous may stem from a deeper analysis of the underlying data and economic conditions that challenge the validity of this figure. Here are several key points that highlight counterintuitive aspects of the reported growth rate. 1. Discrepancy between growth and consumer confidence. While the GDP growth of 5% is celebrated, it contrasts starkly with the sluggish consumer confidence and spending. For instance, retail sales only increased by 3.5%, which is significantly lower than the GDP growth. This suggests that while the economy may be expanding in aggregate terms, the benefits are not translating into consumer behavior, which raises questions about the sustainability of this growth. 2. Inflation and deflation concerns. Despite the reported growth, China's economy has been grappling with deflationary pressures. The Consumer Price Index (CPI) showed only a 0.2% increase in 2024, indicating that prices are not rising significantly. This persistent deflation raises concerns about demand. If consumers and businesses expect prices to fall, they may delay purchases and investments, further stunting economic growth. 3. Population decline and aging demographics. China's population decreased by 1.39 million in 2024, marking a troubling demographic trend. An aging population with a declining workforce can lead to reduced economic output and increased pressure on social services. This demographic reality challenges the notion of robust economic growth, since a shrinking labor force may not sustain high GDP figures in the long run. 4. Real estate sector weakness. The real estate sector, a significant component of China's economy, continues to experience difficulties with a reported decline in investment. The government has introduced numerous stimulus measures aimed at revitalizing this sector, yet the persistent downturn suggests underlying structural problems. The fact that fixed asset investment rose only 3.2% indicates that confidence in this sector remains fragile, which undermines the overall growth narrative. 5. Quality of growth versus quantity of growth. The growth rate of 5% could be misleading if the quality of that growth is poor. For instance, much of the growth may be driven by government stimulus measures rather than genuine demand or innovation. If the growth is primarily a result of debt-driven investments without corresponding increases in productivity, it raises questions about the long-term viability of such growth. 6. Sector imbalances. The growth rates reported across different sectors also reveal imbalances. The secondary industry, manufacturing, grew by 5.3%, while the primary industry, agriculture, only grew by 3.5%. This disparity indicates that the manufacturing sector is recovering faster than agriculture, which could lead to regional economic imbalances and social unrest if not addressed. 7. External economic pressures. The global economic environment poses additional challenges. Economists are cautious about the impact of potential trade tensions, especially with the U.S., which could dampen export-driven growth. The reliance on external markets for growth makes the 5% figure appear less stable, as geopolitical factors can rapidly alter economic dynamics. 8. Long-term sustainability. Finally, while achieving a 5% growth rate is commendable in the short term, the long-term sustainability of such growth is questionable. Structural issues, including high levels of debt reliance on real estate and demographic challenges, could hinder future growth prospects. Economists emphasize the need for reforms and a shift towards more sustainable economic practices rather than simply pursuing headline growth figures. Conclusion: the reported GDP growth of 5% in 2024 while meeting government targets raises several counterintuitive concerns about the health of the Chinese economy. The disconnect between GDP growth and consumer behavior, persistent deflation, demographic challenges, sectoral imbalances, and external economic pressures all suggest that the growth may not be as robust or sustainable as it seems. Thus, it calls for a more nuanced understanding of what this growth rate represents and the underlying conditions that could impact future economic performance. The report regarding China's GDP growth rate of 5% in 2024 reveals several critical elements that many observers may overlook but are significant in understanding the broader economic landscape of China and its implications both domestically and globally. 1. Disparity between growth figures and economic quality. One of the most significant yet often overlooked aspects of the report is the distinction between the reported GDP growth rate and the qualitative factors behind that growth. While a 5% growth rate aligns with government targets, it raises questions about the sustainability and quality of this growth. Economists have expressed concern that such growth may be masking underlying structural weaknesses in the economy. For instance, the growth in the secondary industrial and tertiary service sectors, while positive, may not adequately reflect the real economic situation, especially when juxtaposed with the slower growth rate of the primary sector, agriculture, which only achieved 3.5% growth. This disparity suggests that while urban industrial and service activities may be thriving, rural agriculture and its interconnected economy are lagging, potentially leading to regional inequalities and social tensions. Significance: understanding these disparities is crucial for policymakers. If growth in industrial and service sectors does not translate into improved living standards and opportunities for rural populations, it could lead to increased social unrest and discontent, undermining the sustainability of economic policies. 2. Impact of stimulus measures. The report highlights the government's active use of stimulus measures, including interest rate cuts and support for the real estate market, as foundational to achieving the 5% growth target. However, the reliance on such measures can be indicative of deeper economic challenges, including insufficient domestic demand and an over-reliance on government intervention. The stimulus, while effective in the short term, may not foster long-term economic resilience if it fails to stimulate genuine consumer confidence and investment in productive sectors. Significance: continuous reliance on stimulus could create a cycle of dependency where growth becomes increasingly artificial and detached from real economic fundamentals. This could pose risks if future economic shocks occur, as the government may find itself with limited tools to stimulate growth further without exacerbating existing imbalances. 3. Contradictory economic indicators. The report presents a mixed picture of economic health through various indicators. For example, while GDP growth is reported at 5%, urban unemployment stands at 5.1% and disposable income growth slightly lags behind GDP growth, indicating potential pressure on consumer spending. The report also notes persistent deflationary pressures, with consumer prices rising only marginally. Significance: these contradictory indicators suggest a fragile economic recovery. A growing GDP accompanied by rising unemployment and stagnant consumer prices can signal that the economy is not functioning optimally. It raises alarms about the quality of jobs being created and the purchasing power of consumers. If consumers cannot afford to spend, it may lead to a feedback loop of declining demand, stunted growth, and prolonged economic malaise. 4. Demographic challenges. Another vital point that often gets overlooked is China's demographic trends, particularly the declining population figures. The report notes a decrease of 1.39 million people from the previous year, with significant implications for labor supply and economic growth potential. The workforce is aging, and a shrinking population can lead to labor shortages, increased pension burdens, and reduced consumer spending, all of which can stifle economic growth. Significance: the demographic challenges present a long-term threat to China's economic model, which has historically relied on a vast labor pool to sustain growth. This demographic shift necessitates urgent policy responses to enhance productivity, attract skilled labor, and potentially reform immigration policies to maintain economic momentum. 5. Global economic context. The report situates China's growth within a global economic framework, noting its contributions to global growth. However, the reliance on external markets for exports and the growing geopolitical tensions, particularly with the U.S., poses risks to future growth. The fact that China's exports saw a notable increase while imports grew at a slower rate could indicate a reliance on foreign demand that may not be sustainable if trade tensions escalate or if global demand contracts. Significance: as the global landscape shifts, China's ability to maintain its growth through exports may be jeopardized. Domestic economic policies must evolve to mitigate risks associated with external dependencies, and a focus on self-reliance may become imperative to safeguard against global economic fluctuations. Conclusion: the report on China's GDP growth in 2024 provides a seemingly optimistic picture of economic recovery. However, it is essential to delve deeper into the underlying data and trends that accompany this growth. The quality of growth, reliance on stimulus, contradictory economic indicators, demographic shifts, and global economic dependencies all present significant challenges that could undermine the potential for sustainable economic development. A comprehensive understanding of these factors is crucial for policymakers, economists, and global investors as they navigate the complexities of China's economic landscape in the coming years. 1. Economic growth and its drivers. China's GDP grew by 5% in 2024, reaching approximately 134.9 trillion yuan, around $18.41 trillion, meeting the government's target. This growth was primarily driven by a robust performance in the industrial sector, which saw a 5.3% increase and a notable 5% rise in the services sector. The fourth quarter of 2024 was particularly strong, with GDP growth of 5.4%, indicating an acceleration in economic activity. This growth was attributed to a series of government stimulus measures initiated in September 2023 aimed at boosting domestic consumption and stabilizing the economy amid external pressures and weak domestic demand. 2. Quality versus quantity of growth. While the headline growth figures appear impressive, many economists express concern about the underlying quality of this growth. There are indications of structural issues within the economy, including an imbalance between production and consumption, as reflected in the sluggish retail sales growth of 3.5%. Additionally, the real estate sector continues to face significant challenges, with a reported 10.6% decline in real estate investment. The disparity highlights a potential risk that the reported economic growth may not translate into sustainable long-term development. 3. Impact of demographics and employment. The demographic landscape poses challenges for future growth as China's population declined by 1.39 million in 2024, indicating an ongoing demographic crisis. The urban unemployment rate slightly increased to 5.1%, suggesting that job creation is not keeping pace with the economic activity. Furthermore, income growth for urban residents was slower than GDP growth, raising concerns about consumer spending power and overall economic vitality. The interplay between demographic trends and economic performance remains a critical area for analysis. 4. Global economic context and future outlook. The global economic environment significantly influences China's growth trajectory. As the world's second-largest economy, China's performance is linked to international trade dynamics, geopolitical tensions, and foreign demand. Analysts predict that while the government will likely maintain a GDP growth target of around 5% for 2025, there are concerns about sustaining this momentum amid potential trade tensions, particularly with the United States. The effectiveness of stimulus measures and structural reforms will be crucial in determining whether China can overcome these challenges and achieve stable and inclusive growth in the coming years. 1. The Great Leap Forward 1958 to 1962. This ambitious campaign launched by the Chinese Communist Party aimed to rapidly transform China from an agrarian society into a socialist society through rapid industrialization and collectivization. The campaign resulted in a significant boost in industrial output, but the focus on quantity over quality led to widespread inefficiencies and a catastrophic famine resulting in millions of deaths. The GDP growth figures reported during this time were criticized for being misleading, as they did not reflect the devastating realities on the ground. 2. The Soviet Union's five-year plans 1928 to 1937. The Soviet Union implemented a series of five-year plans to accelerate industrialization and economic development. While the plans reported impressive industrial growth rates, they often relied on exaggerated statistics and forced labor. The focus on heavy industry over consumer goods led to shortages and poor living conditions for many citizens. The discrepancies between reported economic performance and the actual living standards became apparent, leading to skepticism about the true health of the Soviet economy. 3. Japan's lost decade 1991 to 2000. After a period of rapid economic growth in the 1980s, Japan entered a protracted economic stagnation often referred to as the lost decade. While Japan continued to report positive GDP growth figures, the reality was characterized by deflation, high unemployment rates, and a real estate market collapse. Analysts criticized the government for failing to address the underlying issues, and despite the reported growth, many sectors of the economy were in decline, leading to a broader understanding that GDP figures alone do not capture the economic well-being of a nation. Future outlook: China's GDP growth rate and economic predictions for 2024 and beyond. Introduction. As China aims for a GDP growth rate of approximately 5% in 2024, significant discussions have arisen regarding the sustainability and accuracy of this figure. Observers often question whether such growth reflects genuine economic health or masks deeper structural issues. Here we will analyze the data and trends that underline China's economic trajectory, particularly focusing on the contradictions in GDP growth, agricultural yields, and the nuances of economic policy. Current economic data. In 2024, China's GDP reached 134.9 trillion yuan, around $18.41 trillion US dollars, marking a 5% year-on-year increase. This growth aligns with the government's target and reflects recovery efforts following the economic challenges posed by the pandemic and subsequent global uncertainties. Key sectors contributed variably. Secondary industry manufacturing grew by 5.3%. Tertiary industry services increased by 5%. Primary industry agriculture expanded modestly by 3.5%. The fourth quarter growth of 5.4% was particularly noteworthy, attributed to effective stimulus measures introduced from September 2023. However, these numbers raise questions about the underlying economic health. Agricultural yields, a microcosm of contradictions. China's agricultural productivity, exemplified by producing 10,000 caddies per mo, approximately 1.5 tons, is a significant factor in understanding GDP contributions. This high yield suggests efficiency in agricultural practices but also highlights contradictions in rural economic conditions. Despite impressive yields, rural incomes have not grown at a pace that matches urban counterparts, contributing to increasing urban-rural income disparities. Economic stimulus and structural issues. The Chinese government has implemented various stimulus measures, including interest rate cuts and support for the real estate market, to bolster consumer confidence and stabilize economic growth. However, the effectiveness and sustainability of these measures are under scrutiny. The reliance on stimulus can produce short-term growth but may not address deeper structural issues such as 1. Weak domestic demand. Despite the growth in GDP, consumer spending remains sluggish, primarily due to uncertainties about future income and employment. 2. Real estate market concerns. The ongoing pressures in the real estate sector, which has seen significant investment declines, raise concerns about its long-term viability. 3. Demographic challenges. The declining population, which dropped by 1.39 million in 2024, poses severe implications for future economic growth, labor supply, and consumption patterns. Predictions for 2025 and beyond. Looking ahead. Key predictions emerge regarding China's economic landscape. 1. Sustained growth around 5%. Economists anticipate that China will maintain a growth target of around 5% for 2025, driven largely by continued government stimulus and investment in infrastructure. However, this will depend heavily on effective policy implementation and external economic conditions, particularly trade relations. 2. Increased focus on domestic consumption. The government's economic strategy is likely to pivot towards boosting domestic consumption as a pillar of growth, aiming to reduce reliance on exports and investment. This shift will require structural reforms to enhance consumer confidence and spending. 3. Addressing structural imbalances. The government may prioritize addressing economic imbalances, particularly the urban-rural divide, and improving the quality of growth rather than just quantity. This includes fostering innovation and high-tech industries to propel long-term sustainable growth. 4. Geopolitical risks and trade tensions. The potential escalation of trade tensions, particularly with the U.S., could impact export growth and overall economic stability. Policymakers will need to navigate these risks carefully while fostering international relations. 5. Long-term demographic solutions. As the demographic crisis deepens, policies to encourage higher birth rates and manage an aging population will become increasingly critical. Failure to address these issues could hinder economic vitality and growth prospects in the coming decades. Conclusion. China's 5% GDP growth rate in 2024, while a positive indication of recovery, unveils a complex interplay of factors that suggest deeper contradictions within the economy. As the country moves forward, the focus will need to shift from merely achieving growth targets to ensuring sustainable, balanced, and inclusive economic development. The effectiveness of upcoming policies, demographic strategies, and responses to global economic conditions will be pivotal in shaping China's economic future.